Hi, and welcome to our fourth TOD in your downtown forum. Today, we will be talking about dollars and cents financing TOD. I am Courtney Mercer, the Executive Director of Downtown New Jersey. We're so happy to be co-hosting this effort with njtod.org, the transit-friendly planning newsletter, as well as New Jersey Transit-Friendly Planning Program. Just for those of you who don't know, Downtown New Jersey is a nonprofit education advocacy organization centered around economic development. You can check us out on downtownnj.org. We hope you'll continue to participate in these forums as well as some of our other educational programming. And just so you know, hopefully we will be live for our next TOD in your downtown forum in the spring. And so now I'd like to kick it over to Megan Massey from New Jersey Transit.
Morning. Thank you for joining us. I'm Megan Massey from New Jersey Transit-Friendly Planning Program. I'm excited to finally continue these panel discussions. We've got a great lineup today talking about TOD finance. Keep your eyes peeled next year for our updated transit-friendly planning guide, as well as some big updates in terms of website. And I really look forward to continuing to work with Downtown New Jersey and njtod.org. Stephanie?
Sure. Hello. I just want to add my welcome and my thanks to our speakers today. My name is Stephanie DiPetrillo, and I lead the njtod.org project. njtod.org is where you can find more information about transit-friendly planning and transit-oriented development. And we will be adding information from this session to our site. So now I'm going to turn this over to Brian Smith.
Morning, everybody. I'm Brian Smith. I manage transit-oriented development over here at New Jersey Transit. First and foremost, just want to thank Courtney, Stephanie, and Megan for getting this speaker series restarted. This is a really, really exciting event. We've got some great panelists on board today, and hopefully we can share some really useful and valuable information with everybody about what really makes these projects happen, the financing of them, and kind of demystifying some of the things around the strategies that go into funding these projects and filling some of those funding gaps. As I said, I manage TOD here at New Jersey Transit. I've been spearheading a lot of our recent initiatives, namely at Hoboken and Metro Park, and helping lend some of my expertise around financial analysis and underwriting those projects on behalf of New Jersey Transit. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our panelists. We'll start with Omaira Echenique, who's the Director of Development at RBH Group, and let the group introduce themselves.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Omaira Echenique, and I'm the Director of Development of RBH Group. I'm an electrical engineer by training, and I graduated in Cuba in 2013 before I moved into the United States. Here I completed my MBA in the spring of 2019, back when everything was good in the world. Right after school, I took an internship at DEFCO, focusing on public-private development opportunities in the New Brunswick market. I worked for NJ Transit, so I'm seeing a lot of familiar phrases here. I was the manager of transit-oriented development. And I managed the competitive bidding process and perform financial analysis for the disposition of underutilized real estate holdings. Now, like I said, I work for RBH, and I started there in the summer of 2020. And I'm in charge of the financial analysis as well as the research, sourcing, and the execution of public incentives for qualified development projects. RBH is a workforce housing developer, and it's based in Newark, New Jersey, but it's also expanding to other territories in the country.
Thanks so much, Omaira. Turn it over to Paul Seppi and let him introduce himself.
Let me take myself off mute first. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to present, and happy to have a discussion with you folks today. I'm the Vice President of Tax Credits and Finance at the Economic Development Authority of New Jersey. The EDA has a host of different programs and products that are used to redevelopment sites, help to fund small businesses and micro businesses, to establish job creation opportunities throughout the state. I've been with the authority for just over 14 years. Prior to joining the EDA, I was with the Housing and Mortgage Finance Agency for about a dozen years. So I've had an extensive career in government. So thank you for the opportunity. Look forward to the discussion.
Thanks, Paul. Turn it over to Sheena Collin, Village President from South Orange. Go ahead, Sheena.
Hi, everyone. Happy holidays. So excited to be here today. Sheena Collin, Village President / Mayor of the Township of South Orange Village, which is located in Essex County. Amazing train station, busiest station on the Morrison-Essex line, serving about 4,500 riders each day. Love redevelopment. Can't wait for this conversation, especially how you make these projects come to fruition through finance. And then professionally, I'm the executive director of the American Planning Association in New Jersey, which gives me an opportunity to work with some of the best and brightest minds on connecting redevelopment to things such as transportation and to environmental issues and to stormwater, et cetera, and looking at a really comprehensive way to think about these projects, the communities they serve, the new communities that they will be serving in terms of affordable housing, and the way to make great communities happen all throughout the state of New Jersey. So thank you so much for inviting me to be on this panel, and I'm totally ready to rock and roll.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Sheena. And last but not least, Patrick Turbord. Go ahead, Patrick.
Good morning, everyone. I'm really excited to be on this panel. It's a really nice group of individuals. And my firm is TOD Plus Partners. We're a real estate development firm, and we focus primarily on TOD projects in primarily urban areas, East Orange, Plainfield, Irvington. Over the last 4 or 5 years, we've actually completed close to $200 million in development. And we're currently working on a 172 unit mixed use project in East Orange, New Jersey. That is going to be 70% market rate, 30% affordable without LIHTC subsidies, which is unusual. And we recently completed a $32 million 90 unit affordable housing development in Plainfield, New Jersey, which we're very proud of. So happy to be here. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Patrick. Really appreciate the introductions from everybody. Obviously, we have a really exciting group of panelists here and really excited to get the conversation going. So with that, we'll go ahead and dive into the questions. First one, we'll let Elmira kick off the answer. But the question is, in your experience, how have TOD projects that you've worked on in New Jersey traditionally been financed? And then recently, given the impact of the COVID pandemic and some of the things that are going on macroeconomically, have the funding sources and ratios changed recently? And then generally speaking, how has the pandemic impacted underwriting and some pre-leasing for office projects and things of that nature that aren't necessarily multifamily? Go ahead, Elmira.
Thank you, Brian. Well, as you know, TOD projects typically require significant capital expenditures to provide the necessary buildings and the infrastructure to achieve a mixed use with a higher density and walkable developments. So I'm bringing you the example of Teachers Village, which is in downtown Newark. It's half a mile away from Penn Station. Teachers Village was opened in 2016. Although it opened and escalated, started opening in 2013. It's a conjunction of 6 buildings and 203 units. It was a 255 million development consisting of 400,000 square feet of residential, 65,000 square feet of ground floor retail, all owned and operated by women and minority newer residents. 3 charter schools and a daycare center serving 100 kids from pre-K to 8th grade. Teachers Village, it was the first ground up construction in downtown Newark in nearly 50 years. And it was unique in the sense that it created a community that it was centered around teachers and parents and students living and studying and working in Newark. And because of that, we knew that we wanted to target workforce market, you know, those that make a little too much to qualify for affordable housing, but not enough to afford regular market rates. So our capital stack had both private and public sources. And at that time, we didn't have any comparables in the area. Like I said, it was the first ground up construction in nearly 50 years. So there were no comparables, there were no buildings around that we could get rents from. And because of that, our pro forma couldn't afford to have the affordability mix of studios 1s and 2s that you need in order to get the LIHTCs. So we didn't pursue LIHTCs for this project. And what we did was aggregate all of those affordable units into studios because we thought it was best for our pro forma. And today you think that's not at all what you want to do because studios are worth more per square footage than ones and twos. But no, they're not when you don't think you can get any rents for it, or nobody thinks you can get any rents. So at the time, that's what we did, and so we wanted to take the smallest part of our unit and of our building, the smallest units, and put our cap there. Even back then, this was over 10 years ago. There was a recognition in New Jersey that that TODs were important, and the urban transit hub tax credits were a reflection of that. And so we were able to tap into that and use it in our capital stack. So this $155 million project was 53% considered loans were loans from both private and public sources. That included the RAFs as bridge financing, and we had loans from the city of Newark and CREDA subordinate loans. We had 38% of our stack was tax credits, like the new market tax credits and the hub credits, and 9% was equity. So now moving on to today, our capital stack still needs help, especially with COVID and the supply chain issues that we're having with the construction prices. And the construction price is still going up. You know, and the Aspire program now comes in at the right time, sort of as an evolved form of the hub credits. And because for all effects and purposes, development would slow down in the absence of these programs. And Newark is still a market where you can get the Jersey City rents, but the cost to build are still very comparable. So as we execute the Teachers Village concept across the country, we've simplified the capital stack by using private sources that have helped bridge that significantly because of the social impact and ESG investing becoming a larger part of the industry, and the qualified opportunity zones that are now coming into space and making it easier to invest in neighborhoods like Newark. So this Newark example is the $252 million project, and we used 18% of this project is a senior loan, and we have 34% of that. So they're private sources that make up at 52% compared to 53% 10 years ago. We have 40% tax credits, including Litex, New Markets, and another 30% of Aspire, and 7% of this project is also equity. I want to note in this project that we're also using project-based vouchers that have helped make it a lot more financially feasible and improve our valuation to get a bigger senior loan. And while there are very established players and avenues for affordable housing, workforce housing is still a market that is in development and that could not succeed but for these public incentives and programs. So in the aggregate, our sources of financing haven't changed much, as older programs have been replaced by newer incentive programs like the Aspire, and our ratios only slightly shift based on the business cycle and the availability of capital from our senior lenders and our equity investors.
Super comprehensive response, Omara. Thank you so much. Patrick, would you mind digging in a little bit to some of those subsidies, particularly the LIHTC aspect of things, and explaining how some of those programs work for our audience?
Sure. So the LIHTC program, which is the Low Income Housing Tax Credit Program, is actually a program that really originates out of the federal government, and then it pushes its way down to the state level. And to think of it, there's two components. There's a 9% LIHTC, what's referred to as a 9%, and then a 4% LIHTC. The 9% is much, much more valuable, and it's a competitive program. And essentially how it works is, think of it as the state of New Jersey has a competition, and developers actually apply or submit projects to it in order to fulfill the requirements of the competition. And there's a scoring mechanism that's used, and there's more emphasis given to areas that have like good educational outcomes, and there are various factors. In any event, the cap on what's actually made allowable or available to each project is about $17.5 million in tax credit equity. And that's really 1.750 million times 10 years. So you have a 10-year allocation of tax credits. And so you have $17.5 million coming to a project. And let's assume the average size of those projects are about $21-22 million. In order to make that tax credit cash, developers go through a process of syndication with a syndicator like RBC Capital, BOA, Wells Fargo's, to name a few, and they essentially become limited partners in the deal, and they give us cash over 4 or 5 capital contributions in return for the tax credit equity, the tax credits that they then use to offset their tax liabilities on the federal side, or use it to, for example, comply with their CRA requirements, the Community Reinvestment Act requirements to invest in certain communities. It's a very great program because in essence, you end up having, let's say for argument's sake, somewhere between 16.8, depending on tax credit policy, to maybe as much as $18 million in actual cash coming into the transaction through the credits. And then the balance, the 4 million or so, is actual debt. And this allows us to build affordable housing at about $275,000 per unit. So you're really building a market rate product that is limited to individuals earning up to 60% of area median income, which is based on the county's median income. And you have a set aside of about 10% in that program would be 5% to disability, people with disabilities, and then 5% for homeless or another population. So that's a LIHTC program. It's very competitive to get, definitely a great source of funding. And the 4% is a little different. And that includes the use of volume cap bonds, and it's a lower amount of credit. So your project, a typical project with a similar capital stack would obtain about 50% of the actual amount of credits you would get under the 9% program if you're using a 4% program. So the 4% is usually used for rehab projects, and the 9% is used for new construction. And then I'm going to contradict myself later and tell you that I use a 4% deal on a ground up project, but that's not normal, but it was done in conjunction with other subsidies.
Great explanation, Patrick. Thank you. Sheena, I'd love to hear from you and get the public sector perspective on the financing sources that you've seen used for different TODs and how the public sector generally looks at those things.
So this is a very exciting topic. I could say that South Orange was a designated transit village probably about 30 years ago now, and then leveraged that designation to justify doing an actual redevelopment study in the core of our downtown, which then allows it to manipulate zoning, create redevelopment plans, obviously offer tax incentives, which for us are the long-term tax exemptions. To make this a little bit more clear, because there's some confusion about the use of pilots, is anticipate that a project that you're building, whether it's inclusionary, market, et cetera, generates roughly $3 million a year in gross revenue. That's all the money that the developer is getting from their project. And just presume maybe it's about 100 units, roughly a little bit more than $3,000 over a year per unit, not counting the affordable. You have $3 million. The value proposition to the town is 10% typically, which is the lowest, which means the town will receive roughly about $300,000 a year. Again, 10% of $3 million. The municipality receives 95% of that, and then the county receives 5%. The schools, unfortunately, do not receive any amount of money from that deal, but 10% is the low side. When you go to about 12% on that exact same deal of gross revenue on a $3 million project, you're looking at, say, $360,000. That is new revenue that's coming to the town, 95%, and the county 5%. And then at the best case scenario, which I love, is looking at 15% of annual gross revenue, which is putting you at close to $450,000. Same setup, town gets at 95%, county gets 5%. And this is land that previously may have only produced $50,000 or $40,000 in revenue combined using ad valorem taxes. So that's a really powerful tool that began the expansion of the downtown after the redevelopment study was completed. What I tell people about financing is your only tool isn't these programs and tax incentives, but the other lever that the municipality has, it's its zoning, is that as you upzone certain sites, you are able to add more revenue to the developer side to offset the cost of being able to actually finance the project themselves. So what in South Orange used to be zoning that was 3 stories high or 36 feet into the air, again, sensitivity about density and height, we've transformed into many of our redevelopment projects going up to 5, even to 7 stories, and we're at 80 units per acre because we're really committed to building units, equitable transit-oriented development, and making sure that we comply with our 20% affordable housing set aside that's inclusionary to these mixed-use projects. So some of these tools have been really, really advantageous, a little bit more on the vanilla side. And what a game changer was redevelopment used to be tied to eminent domain, which caused a lot of commotion amongst private property owners in a redevelopment zone. When the legislature, in their foresight and speaking to a lot of folks, came up with you could do a redevelopment study without eminent domain, it really made the property owners understand that they are in charge, is that they will be negotiated with. And so that got rid of some of the scare tactics involved with redevelopment and the mystery around it. So I think overall, to the question about how we're leasing in South Orange, even throughout the pandemic, we remained a very, very strong housing model. The average household income in our community is $150,000 a year. Average property tax bill is approaching $20,000. And the average home value is roughly $600,000. So at least in the market, and I think our market is really empowered by the access to all the mass transit we have, from bus stations to being the busiest stop on the Morrison-Essex line, is that we did not see a dip in the demand. And so all the projects we have under construction right now, roughly 350 units now, 250 to come, is that they are leasing up very, very fast. Even before there was shovels in the ground, there was marketing going out. And I think that the COVID pandemic has also changed the idea of just your traditional housing above retail into kind of the work housing model, the way that people are looking at home offices and also being able to, live where they work, and also a recommitment to the commercial aspect of office space, because a lot of people who used to be commuting to the city, those same developers are coming in and saying, I could pay less rent in a community in North Jersey and really create that type of environment where they're not paying such premium per square foot rents when they get into the city. So it is a breath of fresh air to see that North Jersey and communities on a transit line are seeing that level of interest from developers, because it's something typically we struggle with, because most developers have always promoted wanting housing near transit-oriented train stations.
I think that gives us a great segue into our next question, which is going to consider any creative funding mechanisms that are out there that aren't necessarily well known or commonly used that people should consider in the future. We'll give Paul a chance to get in here from the Economic Development Authority and give his perspective on some of the different funding mechanisms that he works with and how well known those are. Go ahead, Paul.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate that. Yeah, the EDA has historically been involved in a lot of the areas that most folks would, be accustomed to in regards to transit-oriented developments. Legacy programs that were relatively well known before were the Economic Redevelopment Growth Grant, the Urban Hub Transit Tax Credit Program that Amar had mentioned earlier. The governor signed into law last year the Economic Recovery Act of 2020, which outlines or identifies several new programs, as well as a couple of improvements on some of the legacy programs. In particular, the Aspire program is the primary redevelopment tool that'll be used or offered out of the authority. Allows for residential, commercial, industrial space to be built, certainly with a focus in transit-oriented neighborhoods, but certainly it could be used. I don't want to say statewide because the map is pretty well defined, but certainly throughout. It's not necessarily a criteria, but certainly a benefit to be located close to transit. That funding pool in itself, the rules are have been approved by our board. They are anticipated to be published in the Register this month. I think it's the 20th is the date, and we anticipate having applications available in January or at least early 2022. The program overall has a $1.1 billion annual cap that is shared with the Emerge program, which is I'll call it the sister or cousin program as it relates to job creation opportunities for typical corporate investment that might be going on in the state. So with the Aspire program and the Emerge shares a $1.1 billion allocation of funding per year for 6 years. The funds will roll into subsequent years, and then ultimately we could run the program for a 7th year, assuming that there are dollars left or available. Depending upon the location and scope of the project itself, could allow for up to 60% of fundings of project costs, which would be issued via tax credits for a 10-year period. Most of the state will be eligible for a tax credit of up to $42 million or 45% of construction costs. There are certain areas that will be eligible for up to 50% and or $50 million. And then if it is a project that is utilizing low-income housing tax credits and a new construction project, it could be eligible for up to 60% of funding. We have historically had a great relationship with our colleagues at the Housing and Mortgage Finance Agency who administer the low-income housing tax credit program. A good majority of our residential projects that we funded through the ERG program was done in partnership. I haven't worked directly with Patrick yet. I'm looking forward to that opportunity, but we've certainly had a couple of projects where our paths have crossed. So he's a great advocate for the state and some of these communities. Some of the newer programs that will be released in the coming year, the Historic Tax Credit Program, those rules, a draft version of those rules were just published, I believe it was yesterday. So those can be viewed on the authority's website, njeda.com / I think it's ERA or Economic Recovery Act. You'll be able to take a look and see what the historic program has got to offer. Essentially, it's a $50 million per year allocation to assist in redevelopment efforts in historic properties. New Jersey was one of not too many states that didn't have its own state historic tax credit program, but it's built to be similar in nature to the federal program and accompany those projects that the federal program just doesn't have enough support for, but of course, obviously, focused on New Jersey. In theory, a project could look to utilize both the historic program as well as the Aspire program, as the historic program will only focus on the actual historic nature of a project, whereas the Aspire program will look to include all redevelopment costs as part of that, or all eligible redevelopment costs as part of that aspect of things. Another program that is, I'll say, a hybrid of being new and revised is our Brownfield tax credit program. I think I see Elizabeth Limbrick on the attendee list. Elizabeth is our director of our Brownfield programs. That program will be rolling out later in 2022 as well. Again, focused on brownfield redevelopment and cleaning sites. Will likely to include investigation, certainly remediation. That program is allocated or dedicated to be a $50 million program annually as well. Provides up to 40% of the environmental costs with a cap of $4 million, I think is what it's slated to be right now. And I'm sure Elizabeth will drop in the chat if I've misspoken or misquoted. But that program as well could be used in conjunction with the Aspire program, as the Brownfield program is going to look to focus on brownfield remediation versus continue to be vertical development. So those are a couple of different programs. Something that we're fairly excited about and is really new to the state. You know, certainly everybody hears about historic and redevelopment, brownfield redevelopment things. Is the food desert relief program that'll be rolled out in 2022. And this will reward really the pioneers of folks that are looking to put fresh food services and opportunities in some of the centers or food desert areas. And will allow for or encourage, like I said, those one or two first folks that are in a facility. The first operator, the pioneer really, that looks to go into an area would receive the best benefit or better benefit. And the second person would still receive a benefit, or developer, I should say, would receive benefit. And then other folks that come in afterwards, the subsequent people, could still look to utilize other EDA products, but the programs that are targeted specifically in bringing fresh foods to some of these communities would be beneficial. And of course, the authority has a long history of providing financing opportunities to small and micro businesses that are in these centers, right? So you've got folks that operate dry cleaning services and coffee shops and other things that are typically around a transit area that need assistance. The authority's always had and will continue to have resources to help kind of finance those. So those are a snapshot. I don't want to ramble on too long. I'm sorry, Brian, but those are absolutely opportunities that we have, and a couple are on the books, and there's certainly several more to be coming throughout 2022.
No need to apologize at all, Paul. I think that's some really, really valuable information for our audience, and it's exciting to hear about some of the new things that are happening in EDA that can really have an impact on communities around the state. So thank you so much for that response. I want to kick it over to Patrick. Patrick, I'd love to hear from you which programs you found to have the most success with, where some of the challenges and stumbling blocks are in utilizing these subsidies, and how you've approached those things in the past.
Sure. I want to just piggyback on something Paul said, because I think quite often most of these subsidy programs are seen as being more useful or easier, let's say in a more underdeveloped market like an urban market. It doesn't have the profile of South Orange or somewhere like that. And I believe that they should actually be looked at a little differently, in the sense that conventional developers should start just like, for example, a conventional developer will hire an architect, an engineer, and attorneys, should also consider hiring experts that have expertise in the type of programs that Paul mentioned, and like the new market tax credit programs and the LIHTC program. And it would actually facilitate being able to do more mixed income housing in up markets like South Orange and Maplewood, in these areas that are, sometimes seen as difficult to do an affordable housing transaction with a market rate deal. So we, as a development firm, I'm a developer that does affordable housing, market rate housing. I also do commercial projects. So we're probably unusual in that we've used a new market tax credit program, low income housing tax credit program. Our transaction in Plainfield, to get back to your question, we actually utilized, we did a subdivision, and we actually did a new market tax credit structure on the ABC supply side of things, which the EDA coincidentally was in, with the first $1 million plus to the city of Plainfield prior to us getting involved. And so we use a new market tax credit structure. And then the housing component, where I said I would contradict myself later, we did a 4% deal with CDBG funds and sponsor equity that also included volume cap. Now, when I talk about this, it sounds very complicated, and it is. And I happen to have some direct expertise in that area, but developers could actually utilize these programs through using certain consultants who actually have expertise, just like an architect or a planner has certain expertise. The new market tax credit program, I think, is a really great program, and it's not just meant for areas that are at 80% of AMI, which is their definition. And in actuality, you could do a new market tax credit program in the South Orange, which is 150,000 median income, as the mayor said, which is significantly above the county median, right? But it could be done whereby the program, the decision making around the allocation would be because you might be hiring people from a more affordable community, which quite often happens, right, with service jobs. And that would be a creative way of using a new market tax credit program, which is another federal tax credit program that this one is directly allocated through CDEs. And so that's something we've done for we've did it for a childcare center in Plainfield. We did 2 warehouse projects, which one wouldn't typically see as qualifying for new market tax credits, but we were also introducing urban farms into those projects as well. And now we're about to do one for a school with children with disabilities. But I think the new market tax credit program could be more utilized in places like South Orange and I keep mentioning South Orange because it's a good example of a community that is seemingly above subsidies, but could actually utilize subsidies, and developers could, and they could advance some of the goals that we have statewide with regards to, affordable housing and workforce housing. But I'm a big fan of new market tax credits and the period of projects, subsidies. So when Paul mentioned the Aspire program, I think Paul will come to see you soon because I believe it allows for more utilization of the 4% LIHTC with Aspire, and it would bridge the gap to make those projects more feasible. It's almost like I would be replacing my CDBG subsidy with your Aspire program in a 4% tax deal.
Yeah, I'd absolutely agree with Patrick. I mean, and the nuance of all these funding programs is making sure that you don't trip, that the programs themselves don't trip over each other. Correct. Because they all have their own restrictions, their own requirements. They come in different streams when you look to do, right? So the programs that I've spoken about are generally performance-based. So there's no upfront capital that comes along with it. You get a commitment upfront, but you still need to build a project and do what you said. And then upon completion, that's when you start to earn those credits over a period of time. Right. So timing of that is always key in regards to that. That's some of the thought behind ensuring, some of the pre-discussion call that we had with the group before hopping onto the live event with everybody was some delays that happened into a project. And there's no worse feeling of from our side of the table and my side of the table, and certainly your side too, Patrick, right? Nobody wants to put forth a lot of effort to just have a project sit and get stale, right? So making sure that's somewhat of the carrot at the end of the stick for the developer to get done, because then they're able to get rewarded by those credits or incentives and things of that nature. But understanding the nuances of how they all play together is key. It is an art form. And right. To your point of being able to bridge the gap between a 4% and 9%, ideally that's where the Aspire and historically the ERG program has come into play, with those 9% credits being so valuable and competitive. That market is incredibly tough. A great resource if you can score well enough in that program.
Right. I think if I could just add something Paul said, I think the emphasis should be that we shouldn't look at these programs as being really difficult, right? I think that's a knock quite often. It's really about, like, planning is difficult for me. I'm not a planner, right? I'm not an architect, so that would be difficult, but we've accepted that difficulty could actually be, that service could be provided by a professional. And I think in the same way, I just happen to be someone who actually likes to put together my own apps, and, I understand tax credit programs, but there are consultants and others who actually do this work, and they could fill that space. And then what seems to be very difficult and complicated about Paul's program are really not difficult and complicated. It's just a different thing, right? It's like law. I'm not a lawyer, so I hire attorneys that are skilled in understanding how a federal tax credit program might collide against a state tax program, and what can be done to massage that with regards to the timing of funds coming in at times. And I know Meyer they've done something very similar, right? Your Teachers Village deal was a new market tax credit deal, and you had other subsidies in there. And they're all complex, but it's just getting the right resources is what I would like to emphasize. So the programs are available, but you need the right team and the right people. And I'm not talking about myself, I'm talking about the professionals. Expand your list of professionals so you can actually take advantage of these programs.
Awesome information. Thanks so much, Paul and Patrick. Sheena, I'd love to get your input on some of the subsidies that are available at the local level, the municipal level, things like pilots, land donation, tax exemption, those sorts of things, and how those subsidies have been successful and how you've implemented some of those in your village.
So one of the things that we didn't talk about earlier using the local housing and redevelopment law was also the short-term tax abatements. So one of the things I always love telling this story. So when I was first running for village president, we were having challenges in trying to meet affordable housing obligations all throughout the community. I mean, we were one of those communities that carried the progressive flag, yet that progressive nature didn't translate into zoning and access and housing. And so one of the things after speaking to our professional planner, I was like, give me the biggest tools, every single tools to ignite redevelopment, specifically transit-oriented development. And she had suggested doing townwide rehabilitation. And I speak in simple terms because I know that with an audience, acronyms, all that kind of stuff get confusing. So essentially what you get when you do a rehabilitation is you can do a study in your community to see if 50% of households are 50 years or older, which is a lot of towns, or your infrastructure is 50 years of older. Now, once you get this, it goes through the normal phase of the governing body, back to the planning board, back to the governing body, and you could adopt it, which then opens up the short-term tax abatement, in which case the developer is paying 0, 20%, 40%, 60, 80, up to 100% of the ad valorem taxes. The other side of that, as I was saying, the zoning component of higher density, lowering parking ratios, you can really use a scalpel to decide what type of project you want to build and whether or not that 5-year tax abatement can work. Now, the flip side of that is where it got really crazy. So people assume that rehabilitation means that you're blighted the same way that redevelopment all of a sudden leads to blight. My community is not blighted. I find that word to be a little bit jarring because of course my opponent said, Sheena just blighted your entire beautiful gem of a town. I was like, that's somewhat legally accurate, but it really wasn't our intention. It is just getting access to these tools that you can use, especially for your planning departments, for your governing body, to encourage and invest and offer incentives for the outcomes that your community wants. So I didn't get caught up in the language, but I feel like even if people don't want to go the far way to redevelopment studies to be able to get the long-term tax exemptions, think about a way to encourage rehabilitation, whether that is going to be new units or it could be rehabilitation of existing properties that are underutilized in your downtown or near train stations or mass transit. I think that's phenomenal. I also like to speak in a visual way. So I'm going a little bit rogue here, Brian, if you don't mind. I have a share screen option. And I was like, as my colleagues were talking, I'm like, I could actually show a visual of what this may look like. So I found a presentation that I did with the Housing and Community Development Network of New Jersey. So this picture to the right over here, one of my case studies, it is a project that's occurring right now where there's 110 units. It's right in the heart of our downtown. So it's introducing brand new retail over 10,000 square feet. It's certainly very dense. It's at 80 units per acre. It's 4 stories on the front, and then it steps back into 6 stories. So it's a pretty big building. One of the things that we negotiated for, as many downtowns and TOD projects experience, is that we're losing so much retail to Amazon and people wanting to quickly be able to get their products, goods, and services. So one of the things we negotiated with the developer is we want 2,000 square feet of space to be co-retailing space where we're able to give residents and people who aren't residents of South Orange an incubator space to be able to get a little bit of an area rather than pay what our market rate is, which is $40 a square foot to have a storefront, but to share space and to collaborate and be able to spend $20 a square foot to break into the market, but more importantly, be able to ignite our downtown close to our train station with sales of many different goods. And I found myself shopping like crazy. That's me in the bottom right-hand corner. I mean, I shopped. That was me. Like there was ties, there was honey, there was jewelry, there was t-shirts. It was absolutely amazing. So now if you're looking at the other community benefits from the financial model, is that as a part of this development, I'm going back to this slide, they needed to use public land. We had a public parking lot right behind this development that is servicing a lot of different retail and service industries in the area. Even while they're giving us the replacement parking at a 1-to-1 ratio, and even a little bit more than that, is that we valued our land at $1.3 million. Of course, always so that it works within the pro forma. You can't make a project that is losing returns. The developer is not just a feel-good individual as much as they tell you they are. They are there to make money. If a project isn't viable, it does not happen. You're having an imaginary conversation with yourself. So along with the $1.3 million, and he did say to me, but I'm replacing your parking. And I told him that we were giving him our air. So we valued our air at $1.3 million. Then there was a $700,000 public improvement contribution. Again, this would go to sidewalks, placemaking, pocket park across the street. We did 10% inclusionary affordable housing, which worked out close to about 400,000 plus per unit. But more importantly, we did 100%. The money that was paid to the village to support our affordable housing trust fund was $825,000. And this money now went to a project that is 100% affordable. That's going to be serving special needs adult individuals along with low income families. So this goes back to when people are talking about the low income housing tax credits, is that this is a project that's being serviced not just from a developer contribution, but an application, hopefully fingers crossed, to HMFA. And I know next we're moving into affordable housing, but as we talk about transit-oriented development, some of these negotiations, towns have got to hit their numbers. Like, we're not fighting our numbers on affordable housing. We need to create equitable communities, especially when we have assets like mass transit and train stations. We have to share that. So our goal in South Orange is that everything that we're doing is equitable transit-oriented development. And I know that's the next question, Brian, and it's a segue to some of these ways that we're making that happen.
I appreciate it. You're making my job easy over here. I'd love to hear from Patrick first. What financial tools are available to help those projects incorporate affordable and missing middle / workforce housing units, and how does adding those affordable units affect the project's bottom line? I know sometimes that can create some funding issues, create some gaps. How do those affordable units eventually trickle down to the bottom line, and what's the impact there?
Sorry, I just realized I was muted. And Ms. Collum, I'm becoming more and more a fan. So I think that, with regards to co-op, for example, which is one of the issues you touched on, I believe South Orange could probably be a model just based on what you're saying, right? One is that you've increased density, which really helps if you're trying to encourage developers to do more affordable housing. And we're the largest, and I sort of feel like the largest affordable housing need is not necessarily in towns that are really amazing, yes, say from a high median income perspective. I think a big need sometimes is where people actually live who actually really, really need affordable housing, like the Newarks and Plainfield and places like that. However, if we are going to make affordable housing truly possible, and if we're being fair and balanced, which again, I have to applaud the village president on this, is understanding the developer side of it. You have to do things like make your community more open to higher density in certain areas. You have to be willing to have pilot programs. You have to understand that affordable housing is not a negative event. It's actually necessary. And these are working people. And not everyone who graduates from college, even with a finance degree, is going to make more than $45,000 a year, right? There are people who graduate finance degrees and they're the top of their class in the top 1%. And they're going to start $100,000+ a year and maybe start at a Goldman Sachs. But what about the science major and the arts major and the social worker who's making less than $45,000 a year? That person actually qualifies for affordable housing. So these are not just people that we believe to be less than, which no one should be. But a lot of them are actually people with college degrees, and they actually are necessary to really allow for the overall economy of a town to move forward, because you need workers. What I've seen happening now is RBC Capital and some other entities are really putting together funds that are more focused on workforce housing, which is, above that 60% AMI, more like 80% AMI to 120% AMI. And when we talk about AMI, what I'm speaking of is someone that's probably about 55, 60,000 in Essex County would be, I would say, approaching that 80% AMI to 120% AMI. And so that can be a tool. I think Paul's program, Aspire, would be really good because it provides a level of gap funding that could help to subsidize the affordable housing units. Because the problem is, if you ask a developer that's moving forward with a market rate development to create affordable housing units, let's say at 20% or 30%, you're effectively asking that developer to subsidize the affordable housing units because the rent roll is going to be significantly less, right? So at 60% of AMI, a 1-bedroom unit is probably somewhere around $1,300, and then there's an actual utility allocation that is credited against that, and so your effective rents are more like $900. In a project that may have market rents, even in a place like East Orange, the market rents are going to be about $2,000 for that unit, and if you're in Newark, you're approaching $3,000. In Hoboken, you're about $3,500. In South Orange, you're probably about $3,700, right? So there's a big difference. So Aspire, the Aspire program that Paul, just to shout out Paul's work over there, paired with conventional financing, but with the developers embracing using professionals who understand these programs. I think it's a good way to go. RBC Capital and others, workforce housing funds are really helpful. When the state has CDBG funds, it could be used. And then I think a underutilized tool would be the mixed income LIHTC program. So New Jersey has a low-income housing tax credit program, 9% program that allows for 55% affordable, 45% market. And that's a way to address workforce housing with market affordable housing. I think that program, Paul, I know you're not at HMFA, but I think you have some clout. You should probably expand the amount of funding available under the mixed income program because it could help to address this, affordable housing issue. And then the income averaging that HMFA is doing now is pushing that up to like 80%.
I agree. Sorry, Brian.
I was going to turn over you anyway, Paul. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. I was looking at the list and I was one more, but Patrick called me out, so it felt like it was a debate in a way. All right. So, but Myra had mentioned it earlier. Brian, you had mentioned it earlier. And I the first time I heard the term missing middle was last week on our pre-rep call, which to me, what I've always associated with that missing middle, which it sounds a lot nicer to me than workforce housing, because those folks, everybody work. Most folks work. Your teachers, your public employees, those are the folks really that are in that band that they don't necessarily, they're overqualified for, true affordable housing, so to speak, but they can't afford the market in some of these areas, right? So where do they go, right? And it's even a tougher situation, I think, when the market winds up being actually affordable, right? So thankfully in Hoboken and South Orange and Newark and Jersey City and some of those communities, you're able to push the level of the market rate housing up to a point where it starts to subsidize the affordable units. But when you go into some other communities, in downtown, let's call it Long Branch, Asbury Park, not on the waterfront, but west of 71, Atlantic City, where the market rents or market rates are really affordable, but the cost to build those projects are substantial, regardless of the type of construction that it winds up being. So that is a notion that I think needs to be focused on quite a bit. Certainly the Aspire program does have an affordable component to it. One thing as well, and Sheena, I think I'm going to share this with some other folks, is the Aspire program also has a community benefits agreement requirement for any project greater than $10 million. I think what you've done there in South Orange is amazing. I love the idea of the community market aspect of things, because I think that's key as well to help facilitate other opportunities for people and entrepreneurs to try to grow potential businesses. So there has been a look at making sure some of those are incorporated in some of the projects that we're partnering in. The nice part about it is it's not just a requirement for us, but the developer is able to include some of those costs to be eligible for reimbursement through the program. So, although yes, it's onerous, it's a requirement, but you're still able to get some of those costs back anyway. But when you think about the whole community approach to the project, providing, mixed uses, mixed incomes, having access to the transit and other things that are being afforded through some of these developments that could be done is really amazing for a community.
Omara, I'd love to get you in here real quick before you have to jump and just get your perspective on how the differences between workforce housing, missing middle versus true affordable housing have sort of impacted your projects, particularly the Teachers Village initiative that you mentioned earlier. Do we still have Omara? Oh, I think you're muted. It's okay.
Yeah, just really quick, I have to jump out. So difference between affordable, true affordable and workforce. I mean, I don't think I can add a lot more than what Paul already mentioned, right? We know it's right, these overqualified people that, make a little way too much to qualify for affordability, but in terms of funding sources, that's where these programs come in and really help bridge that gap. So with workforce housing, when you work in your performance, you don't really have to, trying to explain myself here. In order to work your pro forma, your rents don't have to be as low as they need to be for like true affordable units. So that sort of helps offset those really affordable rents, and also the market rent helps offset that as well. But yeah, I guess it goes back to really being able to tap into these programs and being able to use these programs to your benefit and to your pro forma.
Would you say that it's generally easier to underwrite the workforce housing because you can get a little bit higher rents, or it's a little bit more difficult because you don't have the same access to subsidies?
That's a good question. Easier or not, I think it's more into what your capabilities are to obtain those funding sources, right? And with either way, you have programs available to you and avenues to go through to be able to work to make your project feasible. So it's all about information and about the knowing what programs to tap into. But you have sources either way.
Awesome. I appreciate it. I didn't mean to put you on the spot there. I just wanted to get you in real quick before you had to jump off. Yeah, I think we lost you. I think you muted yourself again. But no biggie. We've hit 12 o'clock, so I want to just open it up to questions. We just asked that anyone who has a question add it into the chat. I know, Courtney, do you want me to take it to that first question that you had seen? Do you want to tee that up?
Yep, sure. Hi, all. So we did have it says basic question, but the affordable housing on these projects, is that generally financed by tax abatement, direct subsidy, or offset by the market rate apartments in the same building? I think the answer is yes, right? But who wants to take that one? Go ahead, Paul.
Courtney, I do believe that answer is yes, right? Because it's generally a combination of all those sources, whether it's a direct subsidy or having the market rate units kind of absorb some of the excess costs that are associated with it. So again, it all depends on the market that the project's located. To me, it all depends on the market the project's located in. As I said, some of the markets that you can push the rents higher helps to do that, right? Because at the end of the day, it still costs X number of dollars to build a unit, whether it's affordable or market rate. So if you're able to get more money for the market rate unit, then I'm not a developer, I'll leave that to Patrick to confirm or clarify. But generally speaking, you know, a brick is a brick, right? It still costs me, the developer, X number of dollars to build that brick, whether, or to use that brick, whether it's for market rate or affordable. It's just a matter of how do you pay for that brick, right? So it takes a combination of that, combination of things.
Yeah, I totally agree with Paul. I think if you can push the market rents in certain areas, it could potentially help to subsidize the affordable housing unit that the township may be mandating. But Paul is right. It costs the same amount of money to build an affordable housing unit as a market rate unit. I mean, you could do some uber luxury things and something totally different, but you know, the standard of housing today should be granite countertops or some hard surface countertops, stainless steel appliances, wash and dryers and units, engineered hardwood floors, right? That should be in an affordable housing unit. It's not a luxury item. That's pretty common. And you have central air conditioning, which again is necessary, because then you start, you know, addressing things like what we're facing with a pandemic, right? With air circulation, et cetera. So Paul is absolutely correct. You have to have these subsidies, or you have to be in a very high price market where rents are, let's say, pushing, you know, close to $4,000 for a 2-bedroom unit, and you could probably start subsidizing the affordable housing unit, but you probably need the municipality to provide a pilot, and that helps to make it even more possible. So I think it's more an education process quite often. And again, I applaud you know, public officials like the village president is here, and people like Adrian Mapp in Plainfield as an example of understanding that the more you make the process easier, you could then be very discerning with the type of developers that you permit to do business in your community. So they actually match your values as well, in that they're going to produce something that's high quality. But the public officials also have a very tough job, of course, of, you know, explaining to the public, this is why we need to do certain things to make these goals possible, and that making housing affordable isn't going to bring down your property values. As a matter of fact, it will help to push it up, because you could have a more robust economy, a more service-centered economy. If South Orange doesn't have a downtown, you know, with restaurants, et cetera, it's not as valuable. It just isn't going to be.
And I can, Brian, can I add on to that?
Absolutely.
All right, attendees, I have a secret for you. It might get me in trouble. Developers sometimes lie. I find them to lie a lot. They lie, they lie. When we talk about a pro forma, not all developers, most. You need a financial advisor from the get-go. What we're talking about here is not just a matter of opinion and back of the napkin. When you see a true pro forma and you require developers to provide all of their assumptions, what they're basing the market rates on, what they're basing construction costs on. Ooh, baby, when I tell you, you meet that developer, they have it PDF'd and it just says me brokey with a little winky at the end, need help. They don't always need help. You need to know what the land assemblage was. You need to know exactly what they anticipate for rents. The last pro forma that I scrubbed, because I'm an Excel ninja, they were claiming that they were going to get $25 a square foot, when I knew from audits of other redevelopment projects that we get annually, the average was $39.50 a square foot. And so they are trying to always finagle a way where they can incentivize elected officials to give them the max, to give them the most tax incentive that legally you can under the long-term tax exemption. Every time I've seen 30 years at 10%, even before a project has been opposed. And so question those developers, but definitely have your professionals there to be able to show you, if you don't do it yourself, exactly where you have flexibility in those community benefits we were talking about before. Money is completely fungible. Let's make that clear. If you're extracting $3 million, you can dedicate it towards public art. You could put it into your affordable housing trust fund. You can donate some of that money to the school district if you wanted to. You have the flexibility to decide where that money goes, but you need to know that your assumptions are correct correct. And I cannot emphasize enough that you need to bring in a professional to review those finances. And by the way, your town doesn't have to pay for it. You set up an escrow for the developer to pay for your professionals to double check. Sometimes they're work, right? So that you are getting the best for your taxpayers. The other part that I was going to say here is that more supply makes everything more affordable. The issue in my own community before we became really started to invest in a lot more housing, even like I said, during the pandemic, we were in the hottest real estate market. We had people asking or getting 15% above value for their homes. And while my community was celebrating that and saying, yay, we're a hottest real estate market, I thought it was a bad thing. It shows the lack of supply that we've had in a place that has demand, a place that has transit, a place that has all these different amenities where people want to be. It's communities like us that need to absorb more of the housing in New Jersey and not rely on Plainfield and Newark to construct all the housing for urban centers. Is that first inner ring suburbs need to start sharing in this responsibility of supply to make all of New Jersey a lot more affordable for all of our residents.
Amen. Thank you, Sheena.
If I could just comment on Sheena's thing. So I'm a huge proponent of something she said, right? Which is that cities should definitely hire financial planners. And I think most of the municipalities we've dealt with, Plainfield, East Orange, et cetera, they use a highly reputable outside financial planning firm. I am totally in favor of transparency. I think Paul even said it well, right? It's a numbers game, right? It does cost X amount of money to build a unit of housing. I am really for using market data for determining, project values and rents, et cetera. And I think, unfortunately, quite often, there isn't a reliance on financial data. I think you have areas in this state that do not have as much retail and commercial space, primarily because people are using race-based stereotyping in deciding whether or not a community could actually afford to have a retail business or something like that. So I am extremely pro developing in the areas that have been underserved because of race that clouds economic data. And I think it's a real issue. So I do believe that you should have a good pro forma. You should have your financial advisors look at it. And also understand that there's opportunity cost. So if a municipality makes the process extremely restrictive, then ultimately developers will go somewhere else and they'll move to somewhere else. But I think we should definitely be using finance and real performers and real analysis to make these decisions and also address the fear factors that people have and the things that people say that are not based on financial studies when they're talking about economics, but they're instead based on their own racial biases or past racial experiences, et cetera. And my point is, if certain communities want to be very restrictive about building out their downtowns or allowing developers like myself to come in, I'm going to keep making places like Plainfield as much as I can amazing. And we'll continue to do that.
Thank you, Patrick. We have a few more questions and let's try, because we've got about 6 minutes. Let's maybe have one person answer each one. Do you expect rising costs and supply chain issues to have a significant impact on affordability if the current trends are sustained?
Yes. Yes, it's already happening. We are fortunate that we have a project in East Orange that we actually got in the ground and we got started, even though material costs increased by like 30-40%. And that's because my joint venture partners have to have really deep pockets and they were able to do that. It is literally affecting projects because construction financing, the LTVs are much lower now. So you do now have like a race to the top. The high quality developers are going to stay around and the ones who are not as well capitalized will fall off. And it's going to affect the ability to generate affordable housing in these mixed income transactions because the capital is sort of like drying up to some extent. So you see projects happening, but they're people who are really well capitalized. There's a lot of projects that are not moving forward today.
So to get back to Sheena's point, those pro formas, when you have someone in, they might need to be tweaked a bit considering the supply chain
Right.
now. Next question was, do such projects pay impact fees to the towns for roads, traffic, school, parking, infrastructure? Sheena, I think you might want to have an answer to that one.
Sure. It's kind of like one of those domino effects. You can name anything that a normal homeowner contributes to through their taxes, but for these redevelopment projects, it comes in the form of what's an annual service charge. And like I said earlier, percentage of gross revenue. So through the rents and through the agreement that you have as a part of the redevelopment plan, redevelopers agreement, and financial agreement, the revenue received from that goes to all of those things. And like I said, even though the schools aren't a part of a piloted structure, there's nothing that stops municipalities from partnering with the schools to advance some type of objective. Right now, the money that we're receiving from 3 projects is financing our public library, our Baird Community Center, but I could take that money and put it towards roads if I wanted to. So it's about, the community and the governing body prioritizing where new revenue is coming from to keep the overall tax levy for the homeowners lower than what we've seen in New Jersey, which is the highest tax state in the country, or at least in the top 5. So new revenue is new revenue.
Great. Next question is about parking. Parking can often push up construction costs and thus prices. Assuming TOD projects have reduced and/or, depending on where you are, eliminated parking minimums, do you find developers are taking advantage of this? Or are they building more parking than required, even near transit? And I'll jump in on this with my own follow-up question. I know, 2010s in Jersey City, they tried to do, they have it a parking maximum. But some of the financiers for the developments was saying, well, you can't make this project work unless you have this much parking. And one of the savvy developers who'd been around and had proof, he said, no, look, this is the occupancy of my parking. I have all of these empty spots because you told me I had to build this much. So I guess my follow-up question is, are the banks getting a little more savvy when it comes to parking, or are they still pushing these higher levels, particularly with TOD?
I think the parking is being pushed by the municipalities, and it isn't, and I believe a lot of it is constituents' pressures, right? They're like, we think that people are going to be parking in front of our homes or on our streets, so you need to have more parking. I had a conversation with a municipality recently where I said, is the parking requirement political? Is the parking requirement real? Right? And if the parking requirement is political and you want me to build a parking, fine, we'll do that, but you'll have excess parking. And if you address the political issue, then maybe you could ask us to do something else. Like, for example, invest in some of your infrastructure needs, maybe invest in helping that town to become a better low carbon footprint or something, or sustainability goals, right? So I think it's having courage quite often to say, we don't need 2-to-1 parking or 1-to-1 parking, depending on the town. It's different everywhere. We also have so much new technology, right? You have Uber and Lyft and all of these different services that people are using. It has essentially changed the need for parking. If I live in a downtown area or like South Orange and Maplewood, where you have the shuttle service, I think that really helps in reducing the parking need. Probably in downtown South Orange, you probably would have to have much more parking. If you didn't have a shuttle service, I think more communities should look into that and maybe ask developers to fund it in lieu of parking.
Go ahead, Gina.
Or can I jump in? I agree with what Patrick said, and I disagree with the elected officials pushing more parking standards. I think most communities with downtowns, especially ones right next to train stations, they don't have parking problems, they have walking problems. And so we lowered our ratios from 2.5 for a 2-bedroom down to 1. We're at a full 1-to-1 ratio for all new units that are being done vis-a-vis redevelopment. And I want that number to go even lower. Communities want walkability, they want ease of mobility, whether it's for seniors or for people who aren't driving around. So in our most recent project that I could see out my window, because I live in a TOD project, is the developer said these are luxury units. Each one of these units needs two parking spaces. So the entire ground floor was going to be nothing but parking. So we as elected officials pushed back and said, you're not getting 2 parking spaces. Wow. And they were like, well, what are we going to do with that space on the ground floor? And we said, you're going to create an artist incubator space where now we have artists who otherwise can't afford $40 a square foot collaborating together on a shared space, a presentation space, and art walls along the side of the building that now is going to display those various pieces of art, whether it be our high school students or the people in our community who are engaged. Is that some developers will want that, other ones will have to fight the municipality justifying why a TOD project needs so much parking when it is the worst use of land that you can do. So I am anti-parking. Maybe strike that from the edited video, but we rely way too heavily, especially in these type of communities near mass transit, on forcing people to buy vehicles or wanting to attract that when we can tell them
Right.
your option isn't to. Your option is going to be one vehicle. You live like 10 steps away from mass transit.
Take the money for those extra structured spots and put it into bike ped safety. That's my 2
Exactly.
cents. And I'm going to toss it back to, because we're now at 12:16, back to Brian to wrap us up. Thank you, everybody.
Hey, thank you, everyone. Thank you most of all to the panelists, Sheena, Paul, Amira, and Patrick. Really, really appreciate all the valuable insight you provided on financing these projects and what makes them go from a financial perspective. Before we wrap up, I just want to mention that this is going to be posted on the Transit Friendly Planning, I believe the Transit Friendly Planning website. Courtney, correct me if I'm wrong.
I'm sure both. Downtown New Jersey will post it, and I'm sure Stephanie is going to post it as well.
So that'll be up there on Monday. If anybody would like to download this or share it, the entirety of the forum was recorded. So just really appreciate the audience's participation. I think we had a really lively question and answer period, and hopefully we were able to give everybody some new knowledge today.
Many thanks to everyone. It was wonderful.
Thank you all.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
See you soon.
enjoy the holidays.